why most men won't talk about it, and why I'm most passionate to talk about it. Welcome to day 3 of the July Creator Challenge, where I'm recording a video a day for the whole month of July. And if you haven't seen the previous videos, you can find them up here in the description somewhere. And if you don't know the rules, the limitations that I put on myself to make this a challenge, it's pretty simple. The first one being I can't have a script. If you know me, most of my solo podcasts are very scripted, and I'm trying to get away from that by getting better at just being off the cuff and going off of outlines over exact word for word scripts. And then the other is the topic. The topic of these videos will either be a ChatGPT journal prompt that I'll be expressing live, or it'll be questions that you ask. So be sure to comment below, and I love to answer them in the coming videos. Now, today is one of those journal prompts, and it's describe a time you were overwhelmed and anxious. I can think of plenty of times I felt overwhelmed and anxious in my life, but the one that I can think of was really a pivotal moment in my whole journey was in 2020, October of 2020 to be exact. We had just had our first child, our son, and I can remember having a baby amid a world pandemic and lockdowns was truly such an interesting thing for me. But most importantly, I can think of the time about 6 to 8 months into having him. Now, before that, I had felt like God was leading me that first year of having our son. I felt like I had 2 directives: serve faithfully at my church and be a stay-at-home dad. And we looked at it financially, and it made the most sense because at the time, yes, I left a stable, safe, secure ministry job working for a full-time ministry. I was editing YouTube and social media, hence the reason I'm even doing these videos now. It kind of was a little passion of mine even back then, but I really felt like the Lord was saying, go all in and be a stay-at-home dad. And it just made sense financially as well because my wife is a successful hairstylist, and just on paper and spiritually and where we were, it made the most sense. But with that said, before I even go any deeper into the anxiety and the overwhelm of the story, I want to encourage you at home that I quickly found out that being a stay-at-home parent is drastically underpaid and undervalued. And I want to encourage you, any of you at home, if you were a stay-at-home mom or stay-at-home dad, I want to encourage you that you were seen, you were valuable, and you were heard. And those days are long, but the years are short, and it's so worth it. This time with your family, with your kids, and the bond that you were creating, they are going to remember for a lifetime. So don't quit. And I also want to encourage the stay-at-home dads out there, because I feel like there's been this stigma of men can only provide for their family on the area of finance. And I want to encourage you, it's both and. Not only are we as men, as godly men, called to provide financially for our family, but we're supposed to lead our family. And that goes in being present, because I don't know about you, but if you grew up with a dad that was always working, sure, you were appreciative that you had the things, but much more than the things, you wanted the time with him. So I really want to encourage you with that. And also, I also want to make the distinction of there are some stay-at-home dads out there that have just let it be an excuse to play video game, to be lazy. But that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about you, true present dads that actually have a plan to lead and be present for your lives. You are really leading the charge and leading the legacy of this. But back to my story in this is I can think my son was around 6 to 8 months old. And I can remember being at home with him, and it's just me and him. And I mean, it kind of PTSD of the pandemic and lockdown. And I can remember there was days that I started getting these super overwhelmed anxiety attacks, feeling like, how can I take care of this child? And I also felt the weight of not providing financially for my family in this time. And it just became such a heaviness. I can remember I would wake up and I would be dreading the day. I remember I would physically feel like my arms were on fire, like I had sunburn, but I didn't have any sunburn. I had this tingling. I had shortness of breath down to the point that I thought I had asthma because I started having panic attacks. And it was around this time that I discovered Dr. Caroline Leaf's work and this idea of neuroplasticity, which means that our brains aren't finite, that our brains are like plastic, like clay. They can be molded and shaped, and we can create new neural pathways. And in this, Dr. Caroline Leaf's work is amazing, and I definitely recommend it if you haven't seen it. But there's one thing in particular, it's called neurocycles. And I can remember the whole object of these neurocycles, and I won't get into the nitty gritty of it, but essentially you just for 64 days, I want to say, go through these daily exercises to journal, to do these different tasks that really get you into the subconscious, and you find the root causes of anxiety or being overwhelmed. For me, what I found is there was this anxiety around health, partially from the PTSD of a pandemic, but also from when I was 15, my grandfather died, and we actually had his funeral on the day of my birthday. And I never realized I didn't truly process that grief from my childhood. And it was the moment that I processed this grief that I discovered that there was these fears inside of me now as a father. I had this fear of dying, not because I know I'm going to heaven. I truly believe it. I accept Jesus. I believe that I'm going to go to heaven. But it was the time frame and who I was leaving behind. I was worried about leaving my son behind, not being able to care for him, leaving my wife behind, not being able to be a part of their life as they grow up, and even thinking of future kids. I say all that to say that for me, the overwhelm and the anxiety came from the root cause of dying and not being able to take care of my son and my wife. And after doing this self-reflection, this deep dive, I found the root cause of this fear. And I believe that if you were struggling with being overwhelmed or anxious or anxiety, then I really encourage you to do the deep inner work to see the root cause of it, because a lot of times the problem is rarely the problem. And a lot of times the addiction or the bias that we turn to cope is something that's actually not it's the symptom, it's not the root cause. Like a lot of people may battle with porn, or they may battle with drugs and alcohol abuse. A lot of times that's not the main issue, that's the symptom, that's the coping mechanism of the root cause. And if you can treat the root, if you can get true healing from that trauma, that childhood trauma. So you can imagine going through this is why I'm now so passionate about helping other men and advocating for awareness and support for men's mental health. And this is what I'm talking about. Yet most men, we don't want to talk about it. And I want to read you some stats to further explain that. And yes, I am looking at my outline for this portion. Don't come at me in the comments. It's not a script. It's my outline. So 77% of men have suffered from symptoms of mental health conditions like anxiety, stress, and depression. And 40% of men have never spoken to anyone about their mental health. That's wild. Also, 35% think they had a diagnosable mental health condition at some point in their life, while 19.5% have been professionally diagnosed. So as you can tell, most men aren't talking about their mental health. And a lot of the causes are work, finances, health, relationship. So why are men not talking about this? Well, the stats have said this is why they don't. 29% say they're too embarrassed to talk about it. 20% cite the idea that there's a negative stigma around having bad mental health. 18% don't want to admit they need help. Man, how much of us men with our pride and our ego are afraid to admit that we need help? Well, I want to encourage you today, friend, you watching this, that it's okay not to be okay, and help doesn't mean you're weak. Getting help is a sign of strength, knowing that you want to be the best for your business, for your family, for your wife. I think another big issue here is there's a big traditional idea of strong men, tough guys, real men don't cry. And I really feel like that affects our willingness as men to be open about our emotions and truly grow in self-awareness, self-regulation, emotional intelligence, empathy. These are key things that we need to master as men so that we can better show up for the women and the children. Let's think about when we don't address our mental health issues, what is that affecting in your life? It's affecting your work performance. It's affecting your relationships with not only your spouse and kids, but also your work relationships, your friend relationships. It's essential for us to grow and talk about it. And the thing is, the first step is recognition. And it's out of the recognition, then we can reorganize, we can rebuild, we can refine, ourselves in a way that's going to help us be more healthy mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally. And I'd like to touch a little bit on some of those common experiences that we may find in this mental health. Like maybe you're experiencing a persistent worry or sadness, or maybe you're withdrawing, you have difficulty concentrating, fatigue, you have physical symptoms like I did. For me, it was all of these things. My mind would wonder, it would start catastrophizing, thinking of the worst. And the thing is, we have to also see the significant sign. Some men turn to substance abuse. They get extremely angry. We work obsessively. We get into workaholicism. We start getting too reckless. So I'm curious, how can we break this stigma? I want to emphasize this importance of how we can break this stigma around men's mental health. Because the thing is men, the thing is leaders, and I mentioned it before in my video yesterday, is leaders go first. So one way that we can practically address and bring awareness to mental health is we must embrace that vulnerability. We must be humble, open, and transparent with the truth of our life, that we really are going through things sometimes. And we have to be honest and real about it. So I really want to encourage you to speak to those that you trust. That could even be myself, because as a coach, I really want to create that safe space for men to talk about this and to get healing from this. In this community, may we find that healing and safe, judgment-free place here. And then some practical steps that you can apply today is, I really want you to prioritize your self-care. And I know we hear that so cliche, and honestly, I'm sick of hearing the cliche of self-care isn't selfish. But the truth is, a lot of the cliches and a lot of the basics are that because we must master them. And they're only cliches because they're true. And I really want to encourage you, if you set your day up where the first thing you do in your priorities is you make time to spend time with God, because ultimately our self-care should be our connection to God. Because if we can tie into meditation and prayer, focusing on what God's will is for our lives, what God's plan is for our life, then we can see our trajectory of our life completely change. If you prioritize your sleep, that's what's going to really help you. If you prioritize moments of not overworking, not over pushing yourself, doing those small things that you really enjoy and love to do, understand that there's a better way of leaning into the things that will make you feel most alive. And in closing, I really hope my story of dealing with this and being open about it will encourage you to do the same. And I really feel like the way to change starts inside. And if we want to be the best we can be, if we want to lead our wives, if we want to lead our kids, if we want to lead our communities well, we must first lead ourselves. And I believe leading ourselves is learning that the Prince of Peace has given us peace of mind and heart. And that comes from understanding and healing and doing the deep work to understand why we think the way we think, to understand why we feel the way we feel, not suppressing emotions, not suppressing thoughts, but addressing them. Because I can guarantee you, one negative and intrusive thought that you have that's unkept, that will be like a snake in the grass. That will be like a root of destruction for your life. Bring it to the light, friend. I want to encourage you again, if this video is encouraging you, let me know. Share it with a friend. Most importantly, please comment below what you got most out of this video, but also comment below with the questions you have for me so I can answer them, because I'm really wanting to make the most out of this whole month journey of the July Creator Challenge. I'll see you tomorrow for day 4.